Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough when people discuss Tom Holland's Spider-Man. This version of the character has technically won every single time. He stops the Vulture. He takes down Mysterio. He saves the entire multiverse. By any objective measure, Peter Parker is undefeated. And yet, if you actually sit with where he ends up after each of those victories, there's this quiet, almost uncomfortable pattern that keeps repeating itself. He wins the fight and loses something irreplaceable in the process. Every single time. And I think that pattern is the entire key to understanding what Brand New Day is really supposed to be doing for this character. Let's actually trace this, because I think once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. Homecoming is Peter at his most stable. And I know that sounds strange because he makes plenty of mistakes in that film. He's reckless, he's overconfident, he almost gets people killed. But emotionally, he still has everything. He has Aunt May. He has Ned. He has this awkward, endearing crush on Liz that goes sideways but doesn't destroy him. By the end, he turns down the Avengers, which is actually a really grounded, self-aware decision, and he walks away with his identity intact. That's the foundation. That's Peter at the beginning of something. Then Far From Home does something sneaky. On the surface, it looks like a win. He figures out Mysterio's game. He saves the day in Prague, and then in London, and he and MJ finally get their moment on the bridge. For about 30 seconds, it genuinely feels like Peter caught a break. And then the post-credit scene detonates everything. His face is on every screen in New York. His name is out there. And suddenly the win has a receipt attached to it that he wasn't prepared to pay. And then No Way Home takes that receipt and multiplies it by everything. What Peter does in that film is genuinely heroic. He chooses to save people who tried to kill him. He watches his mentor figure die again. And when there's no other way to protect the people he loves, he makes the call to erase himself and their memories entirely. That's not a failure. That's the most selfless thing the MCU has ever asked a character to do. But the cost of it is his entire emotional world. MJ doesn't know him. Ned doesn't know him. He's standing in a New York City full of people, and he's completely alone in a way that goes way beyond physical isolation. So when you line those three films up, stability, then a hollow victory, then total emotional reset, what you're actually looking at is a very deliberate arc of escalating sacrifice. And the question Brand New Day has to answer is what comes after that. The title is doing a lot of work here, and I think it's worth slowing down on it. Brand New Day sounds optimistic. It sounds like a fresh start, like the sun coming up after a long night. And sure, on one level, that's exactly what it's gesturing at. Peter in a new chapter, rebuilding from scratch. But here's the thing about the MCU's relationship with clean slates. They don't really do them. Every reset in this franchise comes loaded with consequences that don't show up until later. Tony surviving the wormhole in the Avengers didn't give him peace. It gave him PTSD. Steve getting his dance with Peggy came at the cost of never fully reconciling what that meant for the timeline. The MCU's version of a fresh start is almost always fresh start, but complicated. So when I look at Brand New Day, I'm not reading it as Peter Parker getting his life back. I'm reading it as Peter Parker being handed a blank page and having to decide what to write on it. And that's actually a much more interesting story if they handle it right. What we're seeing in early footage and what's been hinted about the film setup suggests he's still in that post-No Way Home isolation. He's not restored. He's not reconnected. He's operating in a version of his life where the people who knew him best are just strangers now. And there's something genuinely heartbreaking about that premise when you sit with it, because it means every interaction he has with MJ or Ned carries this invisible weight that only he feels. Okay, so here's where I want to get into the actual narrative possibilities, because I think there are a few very different directions this film could go, and each one says something different about where Marvel sees this character long-term. The first theory, and the one I find most emotionally compelling, is that Brand New Day doesn't do a full memory restoration, but it does something subtler. It lets the people who knew Peter start feeling something without being able to explain it. Not recognition exactly, more like an echo. MJ meeting him and not being able to shake the sense that something about him is familiar. Ned gravitating toward him in a way that doesn't make logical sense to either of them. That kind of storytelling would let Marvel rebuild emotional stakes gradually without cheapening the sacrifice Peter made in No Way Home. It respects the weight of that choice while still giving audiences something to hold on to. Done well, it would be devastating in the best way. The second theory is actually the more unsettling one for Peter as a character. What if Brand New Day isn't about recovering what he lost at all? What if it's about him finally accepting that he can't? That the life he had before is genuinely gone, and the film pushes him toward building a completely separate identity as Spider-Man, one that doesn't depend on Peter Parker's personal history to function. That would explain why the marketing is leaning into multiple villains and a much bigger external conflict. Because when a character is rebuilding their internal world from zero, writers often fill the external world with maximum chaos. It mirrors the inside on the outside. Peter fighting 5 threats at once while emotionally trying to figure out who he even is anymore. That's not just an action movie. That's a psychological portrait disguised as one. The third theory is about what this film might be setting up beyond itself. Every major emotional sacrifice in Peter's story so far has been followed by a period of instability and then a new kind of growth. Losing Tony pushed him toward independence. Losing May forced him into real moral responsibility. Losing his identity stripped away every external validation he was leaning on. So if that pattern holds, Brand New Day might not be the resolution of Peter's arc. It might be the turning point where he stops surviving his losses and starts being shaped by them in a way that actually moves him forward. Not healing exactly, more like integration. Learning to carry what happened without being defined by the absence of what he lost. And this connects to something happening across superhero storytelling broadly right now. The era of the clean win is fading. Audiences have seen enough of those endings. Villain defeated, hero triumphant, status quo restored, that they stop generating the same emotional response. What's actually landing now are the stories where the hero wins and it costs them something real, where the victory comes with a grief attached to it. No Way Home understood that instinctively, which is why it hit as hard as it did even for people who were fatigued with the MCU at that point. It didn't give you catharsis. It gave you consequence. And audiences responded to that because it felt true in a way that a lot of recent Marvel films haven't. Brand New Day is inheriting that energy, and the pressure on it is real because it can't just be a spectacular action film. It has to justify where Peter has been emotionally for the last 3 movies. It has to give that isolation a purpose beyond just being sad. Does Peter need a traditional win? Honestly, I don't think that's the right question anymore. What he needs, and what this film has the potential to deliver, is a reason. A reason why all of that loss built towards something worth becoming. That's a harder thing to write than any action sequence. But if they pull it off, it won't just be a great Spider-Man film. It'll be one of the better character studies the MCU has ever produced. Because at the end of it, that's what this has always been about. Not the suit, not the villains, not even the multiverse. It's about whether a kid who keeps choosing other people over himself is ever going to get to choose himself. Brand New Day is the MCU's chance to answer that. And I genuinely don't know if they're going to get it right. But I know I'm watching closely. And I think you are too. Drop your theories in the comments. I want to know how you're reading this one.